All right, so welcome back to Bookkast, where we bring you bestsellers in minutes.
Bestsellers in minutes, that's right.
I'm your host, Paul.
And I'm Sarah, and we are diving deep today into a psychological thriller, The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides.
This one is based on material that you, our listeners, shared with us.
Yeah, you guys sent in excerpts and clues and pointed to some really fascinating details. A shocking crime, a mute artist, a psychotherapist who is just like, I gotta figure out what happened.
Yeah, we want to figure out why this book was so popular, and so let's get right to it.
Let's.
So, Sarah, we got to start with the crime scene.
Okay.
What really stood out to you from those initial descriptions? You know, we're talking about the aftermath of this murder.
Yeah, the first thing that jumps out is just violence. You know, it talks about blood everywhere and, it just makes you think about, what happened there, how intense was the struggle.
And then there's that detail about the knife being right by Alicia's feet. I mean, come on.
Yeah, it's like a classic whodunit clue, But then it gets complicated because she's bleeding too.
Oh, right, from those deep cuts on her wrists.
Yeah, so suddenly the person you think might be the suspect is also really hurt.
So is she a victim and attacker? I mean, what's going on? It's unclear from the beginning.
Right, it makes you question everything.
And then there's Alicia's reaction, or lack thereof.
Yeah, she doesn't speak, she doesn't show emotion, she doesn't explain anything.
It's so disturbing, especially after such a violent event.
Totally, and that's where the Alcestis painting comes in. It's like her only way of communicating.
Yeah, and it's such a powerful image with so many possible interpretations.
Right after this traumatic event, she paints a self-portrait and calls it Alcestis in Greek lettering.
Now, some of our listeners might not be familiar with the myth of Alcestis.
Oh yeah, it's a classic Greek myth.
Can you give us like the Spark Notes version?
Sure, so basically Alcestis is this woman who loves her husband Admetus so much that she sacrifices her own life to save him from death. Nobody else would do it. It's a pretty powerful story.
Right. So how does that connect to Alicia's situation? I mean, Gabriel's dead, not her. It's kind of a puzzle.
Exactly. That's the mystery. Why would she choose this specific myth? It really makes you question everything you think you know about her.
And the painting itself. It's described in such vivid detail.
Oh, absolutely. She's naked in her studio, standing in front of a blank canvas. She's holding a paintbrush, and it's dripping with red paint, which, could easily be blood.
The nakedness adds another layer, too, right? Like she's completely exposed and vulnerable.
Yeah, and her gaze is so intense. She's looking right at you with her mouth open as if she's about to say something, but she remains silent.
It's like she has this story to tell, but she just can't or won't.
Exactly. It's unsettling.
So we have this brutal crime, an injured and silent suspect, and this cryptic painting. It's no wonder people are struggling to understand what happened.
And that brings us to the question of Alicia's mental state.
Right. The psychiatrist, Dr. Diomedes, is convinced that she must be insane.
I mean, it does seem like the only logical explanation given her behavior.
And this assessment obviously has legal ramifications.
Absolutely. The court accepts a plea of diminished responsibility, basically acknowledging that she committed the act but wasn't in her right mind.
And as a result, she's sent to the Grove.
Yep, a psychiatric facility where she ends up under the care of, guess who, Professor Diomedes.
The same guy who declared her insane in the first place? Talk about coming full circle.
Oh yeah, and this is where we meet Theo Faber.
Our psychotherapist who's about to enter this already complicated situation.
And he has a very interesting reason for choosing his profession.
Right, because I was fucked up. Those were his exact words.
Straight to the point.
It definitely makes you curious about his backstory and, what led him to this line of work.
And we get some glimpses of that during his job interview at the Grove.
Right. He's interviewed by Indira Sharma, the consultant psychotherapist.
Yeah, and they talk about, why he's drawn to psychotherapy, what his motivations are.
And it turns out his interest stems from his own troubled past.
Particularly his relationship with his father, which he describes as a source of anxiety and fear.
It makes you think about how our early experiences, especially with our parents, can have such a lasting impact.
Absolutely.
And there's this really vivid childhood memory that he keeps coming back to.
The one about the snowstorm.
Yeah, he sneaks out into the garden at night and tries to catch snowflakes, but they just melt in his hands.
He describes it as both joyous and frustrating.
It's like he's trying to grasp something beautiful and fleeting, but it keeps slipping away.
It's a powerful metaphor for something he's searching for.
And then there's his suicide attempt.
Oh yeah, he talks about swallowing a bunch of pills in his cold room and just waiting to die.
But death doesn't come. Instead, he experiences this excruciating pain, and then slowly in the darkness, he has this realization.
We don't know exactly what it is yet, but it's clearly a turning point in his life.
It makes you wonder if it's somehow connected to his decision to become a therapist.
Maybe he wants to help others who are going through similar struggles.
Now, in terms of actually getting the job at the Grove, it seems like his previous experience at Broadmoor played a big role.
Oh yeah, Broadmoor is a high-security psychiatric hospital.
So he's already dealt with some pretty extreme cases.
Exactly, which makes him a good fit for the Grove.
But even his consultant at Broadmoor had some reservations.
Yeah, he warned Theo about Professor Diomedes and the Grove itself.
What did he say?
He called Diomedes unorthodox and said there were rumors about the Grove facing closure. He even advised Theo to reconsider the job.
So not exactly a glowing recommendation.
Not really.
And Theo's first impressions of the Grove don't exactly ease his mind.
No, the building is described as rundown, and there's this constant sound of doors slamming and keys turning in locks.
It creates this very restrictive and unsettling atmosphere.
And then there's his first community meeting.
Where he finally gets to see Alicia in person.
Yeah, he describes the room as long and depressing with barred windows.
There are about 30 people there, mostly patients who look half asleep.
And Professor Diomedes introduces Theo to the group.
But Theo can't immediately spot Alicia.
He had this image in his head of what she would look like, but the reality is quite different.
And when he finally does see her, it's pretty stark contrast.
Yeah, she's described as very thin and unclean with tangled red hair and chewed fingernails.
You can still see traces of her former beauty, but she's clearly in a fragile state.
And those scars on her wrists, they match the ones in the painting.
It's a haunting detail.
Absolutely.
But despite all of this, Theo is even more determined to have her as his patient.
It's like he's drawn to the challenge.
So he goes to Professor Diomedes and formally requests to be assigned to Alicia's case.
And Diomedes agrees.
But he instructs Theo to coordinate with Yuri, one of the staff members.
Yeah, Yuri seems to be the one who handles the logistics.
So Theo prepares for his first attempt at a session with Alicia. The therapy room itself is pretty stark.
It's described as bare as a prison cell with a barred window.
The only splash of color is a bright pink box of tissues.
Which Theo finds surprisingly cheerful.
As he waits for Alicia, he's a mix of anxious and impatient.
He's starting to wonder if she'll even show up.
To distract himself, he looks out the window at the courtyard.
And he sees patients being herded outside, some alone, some in groups.
And then he spots Alicia standing by herself at the far end of the courtyard.
She's completely still like a statue.
And Yuri approaches her carefully.
Theo had specifically asked him to frame it as a request rather than an order.
But despite their efforts, Alicia doesn't come to the session.
So Theo starts looking for other clues about her behavior.
And he remembers this incident in the canteen a few weeks after she was admitted.
Oh yeah, the one where she attacked another patient, Elif.
Yeah, apparently Elif accused Alicia of taking her seat, and things escalated quickly.
Alicia smashed a plate and tried to slash Elif's throat.
It's such a violent outburst, especially for someone who's otherwise completely silent.
It definitely doesn't fit the pattern.
And Theo has this gut feeling that there's more to the story.
So he decides to talk to Elif directly.
He's starting to develop his own theories about Alicia and her motivations.
He keeps coming back to the Alcestis painting and the possibility of childhood trauma.
He believes that rage like that doesn't just appear out of nowhere.
It often stems from something that happened in childhood, something that's been buried for years.
So he wants to understand Alicia's past to make sense of her present.
He goes back to Yuri to talk about her silence.
What does Yuri make of it?
He says she'll speak when she's ready to face the truth.
But then he goes off on this weird tangent about his own failed marriage.
It seems random, but maybe he's trying to draw a parallel.
Like Alicia needs to confront some painful truth before she can open up.
Maybe.
And then he gives Theo that piece of advice. Go home to your wife and leave Alicia behind. Now, speaking of Theo's wife, Kathy,
Right.
How did they meet?
Well, according to Kathy, it was love at first sight.
They met at the National Theater Cafe.
Yeah, she was there with some other actresses.
And she claims that she knew right away that Theo was the one.
But Theo remembers things a little differently.
Yeah, he admits that he was actually there with another woman.
Marianne.
And he was more drawn to Kathy's intensity. Like the fact that she was having this heated argument with another guy.
Daniel.
He even left Marianne to go talk to Kathy.
It definitely wasn't the fairy tale romance that Kathy describes.
But despite Kathy's tendency to call herself insane, Theo never really saw her that way.
He was drawn to her spontaneity and her zest for life.
And being with her actually made him feel more sane.
Interesting.
So they moved in together that December. And on their first Christmas together, Theo spontaneously declared his love.
Sounds idyllic.
But as we know, things are about to get complicated.
Oh, yeah.
Now the book also gives us these glimpses into Alicia's life through her diary entries.
Right.
The first one is on July 16th during a heat wave.
She's writing in Hampstead Heath, and she's thinking about her mother who died during another hot summer.
She remembers little details like her mother's clothes, her thinness, and the way they used to dance to pop songs.
And those specific scents: shampoo, cigarettes, hand cream, and a hint of vodka.
It's like she's trying to hold on to these sensory memories.
Yeah, and she realizes that her mother was younger when she died than Alicia is now.
That must be a heavy realization.
Definitely.
The entry also mentions this electric fan that Gabriel hates, but Alicia finds comforting.
She carries it around the house, even to her studio, because it's too hot to work.
What kind of work is she doing?
She's trying to paint a portrait, but she's struggling with it. She realizes that it needs to be a portrait of Gabriel.
Interesting.
And then in her entry from July 18th, she talks about going to Camden Market with Gabriel.
What happens there?
Well, Gabriel is really disappointed in how much it's changed. He calls it a sanitized tourist trap.
He misses the old Camden Market.
Yeah. And Alicia is overcome with this feeling of pain for everyone, not just herself.
She even worries that her mother's madness might be in her blood.
It's like she's sensing this darkness inside of her.
And then her entry from July 20th describes a date night with Gabriel.
Oh yeah, their Friday ritual.
They go to their favorite Italian restaurant, Augustus.
And despite Gabriel's cynical exterior, he always makes Alicia feel loved.
It sounds like a genuinely happy evening.
Yeah, they have wine, they laugh, they have sex.
It's a nice contrast to the anxieties she's been expressing in her other entries.
It shows the complexity of their relationship.
Now back to Theo. He's getting frustrated with Alicia's lack of progress in therapy.
He thinks her heavy medication might be hindering her ability to communicate,
So he goes back to Professor Diomedes.
and suggests reducing her dosage.
What does Diomedes say?
He's hesitant at first. He doesn't even know the exact dosage she's on,
But Theo tells him it's 16 milligrams of risperidone.
which is a lot.
And he points out that Christian, the other psychiatrist, is against making any changes.
There's definitely some tension brewing within the team.
So Diomedes eventually agrees to a reduction, but not without some reservations.
Yeah, it's clear that he's not entirely convinced.
Now, after this conversation, Theo is feeling anxious and craving a cigarette,
He tries to sneak out to the fire escape, but Indira catches him.
and she takes him to the Goldfish Bowl for tea.
That's what they call the nurse's station.
It's this central hub where the staff are constantly being watched by the patients.
It must feel a bit like living in a fishbowl.
And Christian shows up there too.
Yeah, and he's super cold towards Theo.
It's clear that there's no love lost between them.
And then during one of his sessions with Alicia, Theo has this intense emotional experience.
What happened?
He's suddenly overwhelmed with sadness and a desire to die.
Wow.
He thinks it's transference, like he's absorbing Alicia's emotions.
That's a pretty heavy concept.
Yeah, it's like her pain is bleeding into him.
And things escalate even further during another session.
Alicia physically attacks Theo.
Out of nowhere.
Yeah, he ends up with a nasty bruise on his head.
And Professor Diomedes is not happy about it.
He questions Theo about the incident and expresses his disappointment.
But he gives him 6 weeks to show some progress.
Under his direct supervision.
The pressure is definitely on.
Oh, yeah.
Now, after this incident, Theo goes home and smokes some weed.
Which takes us back to his college days.
He talks about how weed became his best friend, his solace.
It was his way of coping with his anxiety and emotional turmoil.
And he even talked about it in therapy with Ruth.
What did she say?
Well, she advised against quitting cold turkey. She said it was important to acknowledge his dependence and understand what purpose the drug was serving.
That's a very insightful perspective.
Yeah, and she believed that he would naturally give it up when it no longer served that purpose.
And that's basically what happened when he met Kathy.
He was so in love that he didn't need the weed anymore. Plus, Kathy hated drugs.
So he quit the day she moved in.
But he admits to having occasional relapses, especially when he's feeling lonely or resentful.
And on this particular night, after a particularly stressful day at the Grove, he smokes more than usual.
And that's when he stumbles upon those incriminating emails.
The ones between Catarama 1 and Bad BOY 22.
And it's immediately obvious that Kathy is having an affair.
The emails are super flirtatious and suggestive.
Theo is devastated. He feels physically sick.
It's like his whole world comes crashing down.
Now, during his next session with Alicia, she's unusually still and rigid.
He compares her to a cellist or a soldier standing at attention.
He brings up the attack from the previous session and tentatively suggests that maybe a part of her hated Gabriel.
And she shakes her head in denial.
It's a small gesture, But it's significant because it's the first time she's communicated anything.
Then a glimmer of hope.
But then she suddenly gets up and starts banging on the door, wanting to leave.
So close yet so far.
Theo is now dealing with both Alicia's silence and Kathy's betrayal.
It's a lot to handle.
He feels like he barely knows Kathy anymore, like she's become a stranger.
The image he had of their relationship is shattered.
And he starts having those suicidal thoughts again.
He's back in that dark place.
He thinks about calling his mother, but then decides against it.
He knows she wouldn't be able to help.
So he's torn between confronting Kathy and staying silent.
He still loves her, but he's also incredibly hurt.
And he ends up walking to his former therapist's house almost unconsciously.
Roof.
Yeah, he needs someone to talk to.
What happens when he sees her?
Well, she offers him sherry, which she never does during therapy sessions.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and she listens patiently as he tells her about Kathy's infidelity.
And when he leaves, she gives him a hug.
Something she never did during their sessions.
It shows how much she cares about him.
And she gives him this really insightful piece of advice. Love that doesn't include honesty doesn't deserve to be called love.
Wow, that's powerful.
But despite all of this, Theo decides to stay with Kathy.
He's still holding on to hope.
Back at the Grove, Theo continues to search for answers. He tries talking to Elif again about the canteen incident.
But she's still hostile and cryptic.
She even talks about hearing voices warning her to be careful.
It's creepy.
And then he goes to see Max Berenson, Gabriel's brother, and Alicia's lawyer.
What does he learn from him?
Well, Max admits that he hated Alicia.
Which gives him a potential motive.
And Alicia's diary entry from July 24th describes Max's visit.
She talks about his accusatory tone and how he makes her feel responsible for Gabriel's unhappiness.
It's clear that their relationship was strained.
And she makes this interesting observation about Max's heavy footsteps compared to Gabriel's quiet movements.
It's a small detail, but it highlights their different personalities.
Definitely.
Now, Theo also remembers a time when Alicia took him for a picnic.
A rare moment of connection.
It was actually a happy memory.
That's nice.
And he calls Max again this time, asking about Alicia's suicide attempt.
What does he find out?
Well, Max confirms that Alicia recovered at home, under Gabriel's care, but he refuses to talk about her will.
He's being very evasive.
And it turns out that Max has complained to Professor Diomedes about Theo's intrusive questions.
Diomedes is not happy.
He confronts Theo about it and warns him to back off.
But Theo is determined to get to the bottom of things.
He's convinced that Alicia's rage stems from some kind of childhood trauma.
And he decides to visit her cousin Paul Rose in Cambridge.
To see if he can shed some light on her past.
How does that go?
Well, Paul attacks Theo with a baseball bat as soon as he sees him.
Ouch.
And their house is a mess.
It's described as dilapidated and smelly with cats everywhere.
Not exactly a welcoming environment.
And Paul's mother, Lydia, is just as hostile.
She hates Alicia and blames her for everything.
She's still furious about a painting that Alicia did of her.
Theo gets the feeling that Alicia was trying to distance herself from her aunt.
It sounds like a toxic relationship.
And he decides to go to Alicia's gallery to see the painting for himself.
He's hoping it will give him some clues.
Now, while all of this is going on, Theo is still consumed by thoughts of Kathy's infidelity.
He can't let it go.
He tries to hack into her laptop, but she's always logged out now.
She's covering her tracks.
And he finds it ironic that she's rehearsing the role of Desdemona in Othello.
The play about jealousy and betrayal.
He even checks her phone for incriminating texts, but he finds nothing.
She's being careful.
But he doesn't trust her anymore. He analyzes everything she says and does, looking for signs of deception.
It's a recipe for disaster.
And he's particularly suspicious of her director, Tony.
The guy she used to talk about all the time.
But now she barely mentions him.
It's definitely suspicious.
So Theo goes back to Jean-Felix Martin and confronts him about knowing that Alicia was planning to leave his gallery.
Does he admit it?
No, he denies it and threatens to call his lawyer.
He's not playing around.
But then Theo reveals that Alicia has given him her diary to read.
What Jean-Felix's reaction?
He's completely shocked. He can't believe that Alicia is communicating with anyone.
It's a major breakthrough.
So Theo meets with Paul again, this time, at a pub in Cambridge.
And Paul finally confesses that he was in debt and needed money.
He even asks Theo what the diary says about Alicia giving him money.
But he still denies that she actually gave him any.
And he dismisses Alicia's fears as her just being crazy.
He's not very sympathetic.
But when Theo asks him if he saw anyone on the roof the night of the murder, Paul hesitates.
And then he agrees to show Theo the roof.
So they climb up this rickety ladder in the dark.
And Paul suddenly lunges at Theo.
Theo thinks he's about to be pushed off the roof.
It's a terrifying moment.
But then Paul confesses that he saw Alicia's father Vernon on the roof that night.
What was he doing there?
He was drunk and yelling for Alicia. He was furious that she was hiding after her mother's death.
And he said something truly awful. I wish he'd never been born.
It's a form of psychological abuse that Theo calls psychic infanticide.
It's like he's killing her spirit.
And Alicia's reaction to those words was devastating.
He killed me. Dad just killed me.
It's heartbreaking.
And Theo finally understands. This is the root of Alicia's trauma.
Her father's rejection.
The pain and anger she's been carrying around for years.
And it all came out on Gabriel?
The man who replaced her father in her life.
It's a tragic cycle.
Now, after this revelation, Theo's sessions with Alicia take a turn.
She starts talking.
She tells him that she couldn't speak at first, like she was trapped in a voiceless dream.
And she says that she started talking again because of him.
Because he came to the Grove.
That's amazing.
And she finally tells him what happened the night of the murder.
What does she say?
She says that she saw a man's reflection in the studio window. He was tall, wearing a mask, and smelled of cigarettes and aftershave.
The same description that Paul gave?
He tied her up and waited for Gabriel to come home. Then he tied Gabriel up too.
And then what happened?
The intruder forced them to make a choice. One of them had to die,
Oh my God.
and Gabriel chose to sacrifice himself.
That's so selfless.
And Alicia retreated into silence because she felt that Gabriel had condemned her with his choice.
She was trapped in her own personal hell.
Theo writes down everything she tells him and tries to wake up Professor Diomedes to tell him.
But Diomedes is asleep.
So he waits and then reads his notes to him when he wakes up.
Diomedes is clearly intrigued.
But meanwhile, Theo's obsession with Kathy is spiraling out of control.
What does he do?
He follows Kathy's lover again and picks up a rock, intending to kill him.
He's losing it.
But then some people come out of a nearby house and startle him,
It snaps him out of his trance.
and he drops the rock.
Thank God.
But then tragedy strikes at the Grove. Alicia overdoses.
Oh no.
She's found unconscious in her room with an empty bottle of hydrocodone.
Did she try to kill herself?
It's unclear. Diomedes is surprisingly cynical about it. He says that it's almost impossible to prevent suicide in determined individuals.
But Stephanie disagrees. She says that it's their job to try.
Now, Theo remembers something from Alicia's diary about Christian treating her privately before the murder.
What?
Yeah, and he realizes that Christian never declared that income and pretended not to know her at the Grove.
He was hiding something.
Theo's convinced that Christian was trying to prevent Alicia from talking to protect himself.
So he reports him to the police.
Yeah, he gives Inspector Allen his supervision notes as evidence.
And Christian is brought in for questioning.
He looks pretty guilty.
What about Max? How does he react to Alicia's overdose?
He's furious. He blames Theo for not protecting her.
He's grieving.
But in a moment of raw emotion, he admits that he loved Alicia.
And then he threatens Theo.
Yeah, he says, "You'll pay for this." Well, the narrative shifts back to Alicia's diary for the last time.
And she reveals the truth about the intruder.
In an entry dated February 23rd, she writes that she's realized who it is.
Theo.
Yes. She recognizes his eyes, his smell, his speech patterns, even though his voice was different.
She remembers everything.
She describes him breaking into their house, tying them up, forcing them to make that horrible choice.
And Gabriel sacrificing himself.
And she stayed silent because she felt like Gabriel had condemned her.
She was punishing herself.
And in a later entry, she mentions finishing a painting called The Psychotherapist.
A portrait of Theo.
Now, in the final chapter of the book, Theo makes a full confession.
He admits everything.
He says that he staged the murder to force Alicia to confront her childhood trauma.
He thought he was helping her.
But he ended up reenacting her trauma.
That's messed up.
And when Alicia started to show signs of recognizing him, he silenced her with morphine and framed Christian.
He's a monster.
But he keeps visiting her at the hospital, even though she's in a coma. He's tormented by guilt. He wants to be there when she wakes up.
But then he discovers that his psychotherapist painting is gone.
And he gets news that Professor Diomedes has resigned.
Things are unraveling.
He goes home and finds Kathy acting strange.
What's wrong with her?
She's gained weight and seems withdrawn.
Maybe she's finally realized the error of her ways.
But then Chief Inspector Allen shows up.
What does he want?
He tells Theo that they've found Alicia's diary.
And they know he's the killer.
And the final twist is that Theo is writing this entire account from a secure hospital.
He's been caught.
And Alicia has finally spoken.
What'd she say?
One word, Theo.
Wow. So what stood out to you, our listener, in this twisted tale?
Yeah, we see how the lines between sanity and madness therapist and patient, victim, and perpetrator can become so blurred.
It makes you question everything you think you know.
The Silent Patient is a truly gripping thriller that will keep you guessing until the very end.
And that's why it became such a bestseller.
We hope this deep dive has given you some insight into why this book was so popular.
And we've managed to do it all in just a few minutes.
That's the Bookkast promise, bestsellers in minutes.
Bestsellers in minutes.
Be sure to join us next time for another deep dive into a best-selling sensation.